11. Boom. This is episode 11 Shing! Of the HAX Uncode podcast, video on demand, web series, whatever you want to call it. I am BTO Pro, Brian Olendike on the Twitter webs. I'm a lead developer on the HAX project, which is short for Headless Authoring Experience. And today we've got Michael Potter queued up, who is our lead, I don't even know what to call you, Mike, lead DevOps specialist, HAX guru person, to show off some interesting ideas with Rcoder, which is a service playing with to do Rcoder stat language in the browser, put them in HAXCMS or any other sites, because everything we do works anywhere, and then get real-time evaluation of answers. Does that summarize it, Mike?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, well, let's talk about, in this open publishing context, if we're going to have these learning objects, how's it going to figure out the correct answer? So what do I mean by that? So if you tuned into some previous episodes, you've seen the Rcoder example. So we're going to build off of that. So in this case, we're going to make a page that's called Let's Learn R, for Let's Learn R Programming. And I'm in HAX 11D here, so that's why it's auto reloading, and I'm just editing a markdown file. It's all good. We've talked about that in previous episodes. So what I've done is, instead of using the Rcoder tag directly, I want to modify it a bit so that I can add a new connotation called answer, because before we were presented with a little text editor for Rcoder, and we could process code, and it would process, but there was no connotation of an answer. So let's see if we could add that. So what I would do is, I'm going to extend the Rcoder web component. So this is a really typical thing that you do with web components, is that you can extend web components together. So you can chain a bunch of them together. So in this case, we're going to customize Rcoder by extending the Rcoder class that is exported in the Rcoder web component file. Okay, so now we have Rcoder, and we have a specific version of Rcoder that we are calling ODL Rcoder. So let's add that to the page. Add ODL Rcoder. ODL Rcoder. And as soon as I add it to the page, bam, the Rcoder thing shows up. So I can now use it. So I could say print hi, hit process, and that actually went out to a service that's running. It's a little Rcoder service that's like a little Docker container. We've talked about that in previous episodes. Ran the Rcode and came back with the result. So pretty advanced what you get with one little web component. Okay, so now an answer. Let's say that we want to, for our Let's Learn R class, let's say that we want to give them some code to start with. So it might look something like this. And as Brian will expand on more in terms of HAX, HAX allows you to do all this without typing the code that I'm typing here. But I just want to fully explain it for the to dive into the web component land here. Okay, so we have a span, and what we can do is say A, and this is Rcode if you're unfamiliar with it. Looks something like this. So we could say A, assign that to a value of 10, and we can say B is assigned to a value of 5. Once we do, we have a little bit of boilerplate there. And so maybe with HAX, what I could do is enable the HAX editor. So now I have an in-place editor, and I could say, see if you can print the value of A times B, or we should say multiplied by B, something like that. I'm going to hit save, and then just like that, the magic of HAX, which we talked about previously, it just pops in there. Okay, so as a user of this content, let's say that we publish this site, it looks good, we publish this site, and your users are going through this site. And I would come to this and I'd say, okay, see if I can find the value of A multiplied by B. And I could say print A times B. And I'd get 50. How do I know that that's the correct answer? Well, web components are pretty smart. So what we could do is we could tell the web component what the actual answer to this is, and it could do the evaluation. So I've created an answer property. That's just a type string. And I have an evaluate function. So what it's going to do is whenever I hit process, it's going to do a simple regex. It's going to take the answer that was returned by this process button, and it's going to do a simple regex test on what the answer, the value from the answer attribute on this web component, and the answer that the user typed in here, or the answer that was returned by this process. So basically this 50. All right, so let's see if that works here. So what I can do is just ignore this endpoint attribute on there for now. I can say answer to this problem is going to be 50. So if this is correct, let's see what happens. Okay, so it assigns to correct, and then we say if correct equals true, we are going to inject a new web component called correct answer into the shadow DOM here. And so we should see this new correct answer web component, which is just a visual indicator that you got it right or wrong. So let's try it. So we're going to say print A times B. Did we get 50? And it says correct answer. And the reason why is because as soon as I hit process, again, it ran it. It says, okay, well, what was the value of this attribute? Okay, I specified that should be 50. What was the user answer? What was the result of the R service processing the R code and coming back with the value? And those lined up, so we got a correct answer. If we inspect the web component, we see now the answer is in the HTML here, right? Now we could clean that up. We could, as soon as the web component spins up, maybe we remove that answer real quick. Of course, if I knew a lot about, JavaScript, I could easily steal the answer by printing the value of answer, which would be 50. So I could figure it out there. So I guess my question that I'm thinking through and I'd like to discuss is, in terms of like open publishing, optimally, I would love the web component to be responsible for having the source of truth of what the correct answer for this is. But if not, how best, who should be responsible for figuring out what the correct answer is, basically. So this is one example of a learning object. There could be, multiple choice things. So if you're familiar with H5P, it's like a huge library of learning objects, quizzes, and multiple choice elements. So something like that, where these elements would understand how to evaluate correct answers and do that without having to, put all the onus on some third-party service that you have to worry about. Does that make any sense at all?
No, it doesn't make any sense, Mike.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I guess the concern is portability, right?
Right.
And moving between platforms, which is, I don't know how to nicely say other than like a series of unfortunate consequences. H5P has basically locked you into a living web server forever. It's very difficult, at least from our experience, to get an H5P file to work agnostic of a CMS. So it's one thing to say, hey, there's this player and it does all this great stuff in Drupal. And then, oh, if you need to move it to WordPress, sweet. And then, oh, if you need to move it to an LMS, we'll buy our product. And I don't want to act like there's some conspiracy that like they did this on purpose. Like, I think it's just an outgrowth of their success. But we want to make sure that we don't paint our users into that same corner. So I know Mike's context, he's moved from static Drupal sites, or largely static Drupal sites, to Elms-based content, which is built on top of Drupal with users authenticated, moved from there to a product called Gitbook, moved from there to HAXCMS, and moved from there to an experiments, this HAX11 thing. So we don't want to keep reinventing this wheel every time and starting to have, oh, well, this content is incredibly portable so long as you adopt our entire worldview and spin up this Docker container and, well, it's not really portable anymore. That is your concern, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So I could absolutely see the argument of, well, you'd want to put everything into this service that's processing R. Well, I want this exact same functionality for a server that's, processing JavaScript or something that's doing text evaluation. So it's something that would have to be replicated for each and every service, which is not great. So if we could figure out a way that a standard way that the web component could have the right answer without leaking that information out to the user, that would be optimal.
So WASM, right? Obviously.
Right.
You're just going to write it in WASM.
Yeah.
That's what, I mean, that would
Right.
be my immediate portability context is, could there, and we don't have one, but is there a way that you could make a WASM compiled application that would be able to just run our code and return the response? There's a lot of trust involved, but.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, Brian,
I don't know.
what's WASM?
Yeah.
WASM is short for WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a standard that I'm sure we'll be talking about more in the future, as it's way wider adoption than I actually thought on Can I Use and other things. But effectively, kind of like how there's a JPEG, right? And your browser renders a JPEG and you don't even think about it. You just go, yeah, it's an image. And kind of how it plays an MP3 file, and you just go, yeah, of course, because it plays MP3s, and same with MP4s. Well, WASM is almost like, and CSS and JavaScript HTML files. Like, how does the browser know what those are? You go, well, that's just the way a browser works. Think of WASM as almost the instructions by which it's telling the browser how to handle any of those individual formats. So it's ultra generic. It's assembly. If you think of assembly code as like the layer below whatever the language you're writing in, you can kind of compile anything into assembly as a target. So I could take C++ code and compile it into a .wasm file, and then call it via JavaScript, and it would basically operate as a little virtual machine running off of your browser process whatever that is in a sandboxed black box environment, and then send back the result. Sound like I summarized it reasonably, Mike, there?
Yes. So you could, instead of running this R service in a Docker container, third party, you could assemble it to WebAssembly code and ship that right inside of the web component itself, so that the user's browser is the one that's processing the R code, which is nuts.
Nuts, and there's nothing that, at least, we haven't looked into it as far as running R code on the fly and giving you back a response. So I do wonder if, so I know Pressbooks ran into this issue of platform versus content, because remember they led a discussion at Open Ed, I think it was last year, and their definition of platform versus content where it started to break down was anytime you used a short code, because the short code in WordPress is basically tying you to WordPress or the architecture that knows how to handle that short code. And I wonder if there's really any way around that without something like WASM. I mean, there's no standardized Docker deployment infrastructure thing that magically just works no matter the context.
Right. I mean, the closest thing in my mind is just having like an open FOSS setup where potentially it could run anywhere. It could run, you could set it up on your server, you could set it up in DigitalOcean. The service, could also run in AWS. But yeah, again, that's a huge leap for a lot of people.
Giant leap.
Yeah.
Yeah, so taking the H5P example, right? Hey, this stuff works anywhere. And it works anywhere because of our service. So is there a way that you could have the directions as far as like, here's the way to make this work in your copy of OpenFOSS? And yes, that's a leap. However, if you're going to make this ultra portable and take it with you and run it on your own infrastructure, well, there are some caveats to that. Now, it would be nice if there was a fallback or some way of indicating in browser, like, hey, this interactive exercise requires some setup, and like click and it takes you to the directions or something, so that the content would work without it.
Right. So that's like the two-parter to this question. So the one is like, how could we get it to run anywhere? The second part would be like, what does the evaluation to figure out if it's correct or not? So right here, the answer is 50. Now the answer is 50. Potentially any user could figure out
how to view source.
How to view source and see that it's 50. And you could say, well, I'm going to, basically view source on it. Now maybe you could hide that in environment variables and such, but.
Is the goal to gatekeep checking, or is it to do self-checks? If it's to do self-checks, who cares? If it's to, gatekeep as to whether or not the person has actually learned the material or not, then that's different. So which one is it?
Right. And it seems like that's always the sticking point, where everybody, like, seems like people love the idea of self-checks, but then they also want to know that that their content can't be gamed. So it's like a...
Right. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to obfuscate it, right? I mean, you can certainly like label a variable something that is an answer, and like, for at least numeric answers, there's all kinds of ways to obfuscate that, right? Mm-hmm. But ASCII, that too, right? But it's just a question of, do you want this to be graded level material, or do you, again, if not, or is your concern more having like these sort of things in an automated way pulled out of the course and stored on a third-party site, or is that not something we're worried about? because if we're worried about things getting pulled out of the course and stored on a third-party site, obfuscation would work for a while, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, or what if it was, so the nice thing with the way we're writing these, no human is going to set this stuff up, generally speaking, right? So what if we had that when you make the element, we do have some work around automatically generating schema, like schema IDs. What if you use this, well, I guess you couldn't use it for, well, but what if you use the same function, basically? It just gives you a big random number. And you set a value like key, and then you used key to basically hash what the answer object is. Normal people are not going to understand how to do that.
And I wonder if that is what you could put in WebAssembly.
That's
if
also
WebAssembly makes that like a black box. Where this little WebAssembly service could be hashing that stuff for you and decoding the values for you. I don't know if that
could be, but that then, see, now what I don't like about that notion is that it basically weds you to having to run that infrastructure to even understand what the hell is going on. So if you just had like, if we had a HAX special, so I mean, I wish Nikki was here because she has this amazing schema mapping thing in simple fields now that you can more or less run it through whatever you feel like. So if we basically made up a new field type that for the user, they just entered text, like they said, oh, the answer is 50, but that it actually took that, encrypted that using some key value, and then what got saved into the DOM looks like gobbledygook. But then when you go to edit it in HAX, it dehashes it and you see the 50 again, so you can modify it.
Yeah.
And it would remain portable.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And you could use some like time values at the time that they're doing it. And well, anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The only unfortunate thing is you wouldn't be, to maintain portability, you'd have to write the key into the page, but I don't, I sometimes wonder if we go through such insane hoops for use cases that are like hypothetical, when I've noted, someone asked me today, oh, does this mean you can embed HAX in an LMS? And I was like, well, based on what you and I know of technology, no. Based on what people think of as embedded in or used in, they mean an iframe. So yeah. I mean, are we worried about a problem that really isn't going to ever pop up?
I mean, if you're worried about scraping, if you change that key for every instance, then that ceases to be an issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, like if it's on the front end, you just got to assume that it can be found out, but it's like to a level of, would it even be worth it to somebody to do it? But
right, at that point, it takes somebody specifically writing something to foil this particular web component. There's a lot of effort.
Yeah,
which could happen, but
yeah.
Mike, so kind of similar to what you're doing, but back when I was in like AP Comp Sci, one of the things I used to kind of brush up on Java skills is this website called CodingBat. But basically, like the entire website is, they give you like a small little prompt, like Sally and Joe are going to the grocery store, and like some sort of generic, like here's the prompt, here's the setup, like write a function that figures out how many apples they're buying per week. And it has a code editor that actively checks like your code for errors and the right answers and stuff like that. When I try to, and I mean, like it's been several years, but like what you're doing kind of reminds me of that, in that sense of here's a prompt, here's like, I mean, this is in R where they just do Python, CodingBat does Python and Java. But like if you inspect the code, it's incredibly hard to just find the solution. Maybe it could be something that like you look into to see how they set up their stuff, because there's a lot of parallels between what you're doing and what like they did with this. I mean, they're like their code compiler.
Yeah. there's a DataCamp has a tool called DataCamp Lite. And it's the same deal. It's not a web component, but it's a plugin that basically allows you to specify like almost like a test bed. Let's see. Okay, so you feed this thing the solution to how like what the correct answer is, and the service runs this as an actual test bed on their side. So the front end isn't responsible at all for figuring out the right answer. They get a response from the service saying if the person got the correct answer. Which is really cool, but you wouldn't want to do that for every single little learning object that you write.
That could be a little overwhelming.
Yeah. So that's all I had.
Unacceptable.
I know.
It's very cool. I am still waiting for a nice diagram that shows how all these web components will just invoke the same OpenFOSS infrastructure. So that diagram.
Yeah.
You could just go and make that right now. That'd be great.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess I'm up. Free to divert as, divert as desired. So this is I guess based on the version of the top, this will probably be like HAXCMS 1.2 or something. So we've showed some of these on past calls, this like notion of this little cards setup, kind of iterating our way towards easier to break down, leveraging different components, testing the fact that, our card view tab here is actually made up of Nikki's alley collapses, right? So at some level, we implement some of these tags and dog food them so that we can debug different use cases or edge cases for the next person to use them. However, one of the major complaints with people dropping into, I'll go to im.hax.psu.edu. One of the major complaints with people dropping into this dashboard was, I don't know what do I do? And I have to actually update the CDN, I believe. Oh, there we go. Because I had a bad copy. So previously it would just show you this list, and actually we made these look more like buttons to begin with, but you'd have no idea. Oh, hey, there's a new site. So one of the big issues aside from that, right, and I had a new site, I'll just make a new test one so we can see an A/B comparison. Test. We'll be able to find that, right? So we can pick one of the different designs for it. We've reduced these options dramatically. There were like 10 previously, but they weren't all done. So now there's just kind of documentation, course theme, and blog theme. And if you're a developer, then you know what you're doing. But let's just say this is called stuff. So to part of what Mike was discussing as far as portability, and I had to make, I'm not happy about having to make this decision, but I'll show why. So what just happened there, and the way HAXCMS works, is when you create a new site, it actually just copies files. So you end up having these files that the system is writing on your behalf. And so you have a static website that you can effectively drop onto any server, and you're going to have it. Then when it's in context of HAXCMS itself, it knows how to interact with and write those files. It's also easy to put in version control, right? I just put these files up on GitHub, and now I have my test site up there. The big change that I had to make, and part of this, I did want to have this is a good conversation piece. When you hear people talk about headless and, like particularly headless content management system, we'll say, I would argue there's not really such a thing as headless when you add in enough complexity. And the reason is if you make an API mistake, So this is a fun user story of an API mistake. So let's look at a site that was made previously, so we can set up what the context of this is. And that site is the HAX the website. So HAX the web, this is the structure of the site. I can click through and we can see we get these readable URLs, right? Welcome, roadmap 1, etc. And then just to illustrate that these actually, this is a one-to-one. So this is the published version, right? Which is literally just take the files and throw them up on GitHub pages. Okay, so we've got the same structure. It hits these paths, right? And they appear to be in folders. They're not actually in folders, right? That's not a real thing. But yet if I refresh through the magic of front-end routing, it's there. We have this path. So what was happening is we have an outlining tool. The outlining tool certainly needs love, but it's extremely powerful. And by powerful, I mean easily brickable, AKA powerful. So I can add whatever I want in here. Rewrite structures, I basically just hit enter and I can start typing. So it's a very robust, minimalist outline editing tool. I'm not going to hit save because what we were finding is we went, okay, open publishing, open content, context. I want you to not just save this page that has, in this case, the content of Hex Editor. I want you to be able to find it on the file system. And so if you went into HAX the web, pages, and then I went to welcome, and then I went to solutions, and then I went to Hex Editor. Hey, look, there is the exact content of what this is. And this even has a progressive enhancement fallback where it shows SpongeBob. So, okay, that's neat. Why did I have to drop this? So this is what the new site that I just made looks like. So I have this test. And if I go to pages, there's just this. It's this big hash value. And now if I go to my test site, we'll use the outliner. Let's say this is lesson 1, tab, things and stuff about HAX. What are web components? Lesson 2, take a break from the web, go outside, right? I might have a whole bunch of material here. I might be able to duplicate this and let's rename that to lesson 3 so I can outline stuff quite rapidly. And then it actually will replicate that whole structure. Conclusions, if I get right. So I hit save. That just went and created boilerplate for every single one of those pages. So now I can go into conclusions and I can leverage HAX. Before though, I go to lesson 2 and then I go to take a break from the web. Cool, made those paths, they look nice. It's important to have paths like that from an SEO perspective or search engine optimization. However, now in my pages directory, they all just look like these hashes. And I don't have a great way around this, to be perfectly honest, because we were running into issues where people would be moving lots of content around and the back end would basically step on itself and just gobble up your material. And the easiest way to do that would be you have a path on the front end, like take a break from the web, and another page called take a break from the web. And you get into a race condition when moving these around as to who was supposed to have that name. And unfortunately, there wasn't really a good way around that. And so as a result, it would just, you'd have scenarios where you could lose content, which is, obviously unacceptable. So now you can nest content, you can have nice addresses, and you can easily rename them. Like I can rename this to whatever, and I don't even have to make it nice. Let's do rename, and then we can put in all kind of funky characters and stuff, and hit save, and it will rename that URL, right? That vanity path that you might have in like a WordPress or a Drupal site, but it doesn't touch anything on the file system. So unfortunately, I had to sacrifice that level of readability so that you can more rapidly generate material. Now, this is still, tied to whatever identifier in there. I can actually see, if I inspect, I believe it'll give me in the XHR data. So let's just make a grid. I'll move that over there. Save. So that is going, and you can see that it is loading a remote path there, which is pages/item, whatever the heck it is. So it is still going to the correct content bucket. It is still just an HTML. It's not as readable. And it's not as readable if I were to copy and paste these files to someone else. So is that a huge deal? I don't know. Someone tell me if that's a huge deal.
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
I noticed that they all said item at the front.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly there's a way to put a word that is expected in front of the unique hash or whatever that is. Could you just put the slug of the URL as the beginning and have a totally unique portion at the end? That way it's both readable but unique.
It moves though. So yeah, I thought about making that at one point it was doing the initial name and then it wouldn't rename it. Version control, unfortunately, with Git based version control, just gets really confused when the names of something change, like that folder moving somewhere else. I also found, which part of the portability and importing from when Mike was playing with this was lost anyway, because you wouldn't be able to read the Git diff to know. But that's a good idea, yeah. So I mean, the issue is like, okay, this says take a break from the web, and then you'd have 3 things with that name, and that's a dumb name. Let's say there's 15 lessons, each of them have a page that says introduction. That's far more common from our use cases. So then you've got 15 introduction hyphen random thing that means nothing.
I also noticed that the directory is flat. Is there a reason to do a flat directory versus a folder-based directory, or is it just the naming issue again?
Yeah, well, that was where the naming issue and content was getting lost, is because you would go and execute the operations of the moves, and you, without completely rewriting everything, there's not an easy way to be like, first take this page, first take lesson 1, and move it into lesson 2. Okay, execute the rename, move the folder underneath this folder. All right, now go outside and move it underneath welcome to the new HAXCMS site. Because what was happening and how things would get lost is let's say that content moved under there, this content moved under here. Well, these 3 pages were under lesson 1. So if lesson 1's move gets processed after these 3 pages are moved, then it's fine. If lesson 1 gets moved before these 3 pages get processed, then you just lose everything. So you could chalk it up to, I'm a bad developer. That would be the easiest way to say that no, it is not very easy to move these under directory trees in this way. Now they are still able to be structured that way, and I don't know if maybe Potter, if there's like a nice clean way we could do that from like HAX11D's perspective, where managing the folder structure naming convention is more important to you because you're actually doing that layer of development, whereas the focus of HAXCMS is really in the explosive portability from a person that will never touch these things.
That's a good point. Yeah, the main difference between HAX11D and HAXCMS is that HAX11D works, well, 11D itself, the static site generator. All of the static site generators work under the connotation that they will take a look at your file structure and derive the entire navigational structure just purely based on your file structure, which can actually be a pain in the butt too. Like, let's say that you have files in a folder. By default on your file system, it's going to be alphabetical. And often you don't want alphabetical, so you'll have to come up with just very odd naming conventions like 1_ about, 2_ content, which you wouldn't have to do with HAXCMS. That's really abstracted from you on the front end. So yeah, there could be a scenario where you choose one or the other. Maybe the flat file structure doesn't really matter to you because you're not going to be working on the file system. You're just going to be working from the HAX editor.
True. And the old pages, aka things made before this switch, they still can work that way. So part of what I'm hoping with the HAX Lab, I mean, honestly, the HAX 11 stuff is still very experimental, but what I'm hoping is we could actually run tooling and commands in HAX 11 and generate HAXCMS site outline structure so that you could do things either completely static and just leverage HAX as an editor, or you could actually use HAX 11 to generate a HAXCMS site and not need any of the actual setup of HAXCMS in the way that we're doing it currently. So the locations still work. What this abstraction is kind of segues into the, I'm increasingly believing less and less that headless is headless. I'll just say that. So in the case of HAX as an editor, and this is a reasonable distinction, make sure that we're on the same page. So we have a lot of things, we like to throw the word HAX in front of stuff, obviously. As Mike said, HAX 11. But so this would be HAX used in this case, an online course. This is a Drupal-based system called Elms Learning Network. So I've hit HAX Editor, and now we're modifying this content in HAX. If I inspect, the way that this works is because of web components. We've got this in the page, and it is an H-A-X tag. So that is ultimately what HAX is. However, in this context, it's a content management system. We use the HAX tag in something called CMS HAX, which means, hey, I've got to have this connotation of taking this body content blob HTML and then shipping it somewhere. The HAX tag by itself just is managing that content. So HAX can be headless only in that it's managing an HTML blob. So effectively, its output API is the same all the time. It's just giving you HTML. You're visualizing that and going, oh, that's not just this thing on the page. It's, you know, a video player sitting here. Or it's a heading, or it's a bulleted list, right? If I just give you that as a blob of content, that the API hasn't changed. In the case of HAXCMS, it's the combination of material living on the page. So stuff, and I'll search, and this is showing something else I got working, hopefully. Oh, I don't have any files in there, but let's upload a file real quick. Upload this picture of my birds. So that's uploaded. I can throw it over there, and we'll turn it into a meme or something. Close that up, configure, funny, haha, okay. So I save. HAXCMS is this menu and this content. So it's part data structure as far as this site.json file, which is having all that material as an outline, but then it's also the .html files. So what happened is, as part of this, like, basically breakdown of material getting lost, is let's get rid of this value. We just had location. So everywhere in the app, both on the back end and the front end, we would basically do this. We'd say, oh, well, it lives in pages, right? So on the file system be pages / and then, right, I can follow those paths. But then on the front end, we'd go, well, the way we give you that nice path that's schedule unconference is we go boop and boop. And every time that we were passing around this quote unquote location value, we were doing that. We were trimming off either side of it and saying, ta-da, you've got it. Now, as part of this transition, we have this thing called slug. And if anyone knows why this is called slug, I would love to hear. I was Googling trying to find why people call this slug, but it seems like it's a pretty universal term from SEO or whatever to call the part of the URL that sticks off of your address a slug. No idea why.
No idea.
No idea. However, we didn't have support for a slug. Now, part of that becomes, okay, the front end needs to be able to deal with a slug. And so what that ends up looking like in the code is, so there's the site outline block, which I believe is on the side, or is it site menu? I'm trying to find it. Site, we'll say site top menu, okay. Or breadcrumb trail, fine. So imagine previously this said location. I had to go through and basically look for things that were referencing whatever dot location, make sure they moved to dot slug. That is a front end change, right? We're looping through the list of items. We're finding places where the identifier matches, and then we're moving this item onto the front that has the slug and the title, so we can build a visual list and have you click the button and it goes through the links. Okay, so that's a front end change. However, from a data integrity perspective, I have to account for slug on the back end because that front end data saves somewhere. And so this actually tripped me up the longest in the whole process was, yes, I added this thing called slug. Yes, I got it working on the front end. Yes, I took into account like, okay, if you get an item and it doesn't have a slug, but it has a location, do this little rip off the page part. So now you have a slug, something we should have done anyway. But then I would save that data to the back end, which is HAXCMS, and HAXCMS didn't have this value, but has plenty of places where it says, hey, let's make sure that the front end gave us legitimate data. And so we're going to sanitize off this thing called slug because I don't know what the heck it is. And so really, how decoupled is decoupled development? Because if you make any API or database change for what's needed on the front end, you're doing the same stupid thing on the back end anyway. Is it a little cleaner? Yeah. It wasn't ridiculous for me to then find this in my logic, and it certainly simplified it based on the way that we've written this. Were I to have to make the same change in, like, say, a Drupal context, that would be a little more nightmarish, managing content types to ensure data structure was accurate. But I just don't know how it's nicer to interface with when you get it right, but this just seems like it bloats cost like crazy on some of these applications, especially as I see WordPress is going for like a edit the entire system from one UI perspective, and it'll all be done in React. I just don't know how anyone participates with it. So I don't know if anyone had any comment on that notion, but
no, I definitely agree. There is no like, hey, this is my site, and I could literally take it from editor to editor with no change. You could just drop it in. That doesn't exist anywhere on the web right now. I mean, I think it's what we aspired to do with the Hex Editor for sure. And this in this case, this is an example of HAXCMS having to change, not the Hex Editor itself. But I think Mike, who was just talking earlier, was trying to set something up in, was it forestry.io? And, that's supposed to work. It's supposed to be a pure headless CMS for all your static sites. And he was running into issues with like nunchucks templates or something like that. So yeah, there's really no silver bullet for headless authoring, or headless CMS rather.
no, it's fine. You just store the data as blobs. It's fine. Just throw it all as blobs. It's non-standardized. Kartik has a question for us. Can you show how the site outline is stored? Yeah, sure. So HAXCMS is, Kartik, if you as an independent observer can give me a term for this that describes it better than what I will claim, that's awesome. But HAXCMS, I'm saying, is a hybrid static sites generator. And the reason being is that it uses a more traditional CMS type of a framework to basically just copy and paste files. When those files detect a JSON web token, then they become editable. And by become editable, I just mean they know how to ship calls to a backend. If that JWT isn't there, then it just operates like web components loading statically on a page. So where that outline stores is everything writes to, oops, where is it? Okay, everything writes to a site.json file. So basically, we skip a database by having a JSON file that uses a schema that we coined called JSON outline schema. And so JSON outline schema is effectively our way of saying there is a site and it organizes things, and then those things have this structure to them. So as part of this recent change with Slug, I had to go through and actually modify our definition of JSON outline schema, which I don't know if I've done in, like, we made this maybe what, 2 years ago, Mike? I think it was a while ago. I don't think I've had to change it more than one other time in the last year and a half, and that was very early on when we were just making this stuff. So when you, I'll go to test. I don't like on a live cast. I don't like destroying my sites that I've made because we do actually deploy some of these sites, like the HAXCMS site. So let me go to this test site. There we go. So we're in test. So site.json, there we go. So I've got a banner and some other metadata in here. It knows, for example, that this is share-alike, which that's another fun thing from an open publishing perspective. These sites, there's test, there it is, okay. So test actually writes into it the license metadata. So we can see here it has Creative Commons license, the correct place to look for it, and the name, which is attribution share-alike. Now I didn't write that. What I did is we have a setting, so we can pop open this site settings area. And so effectively what you're seeing is taking that data and running it through some elements that Nikki calls simple fields and presenting that data. So we do have some types associated with it internal in the HAXCMS to make sense of the fact that this isn't just a logo, it's can be a little upload field thing. So I could go to theme and I can modify the theme that I have, or pick a different icon, select a different accent color, or change the theme from course theme to documentation or blog theme. We can go to documentation theme because it's pretty similar. Then on the author tab, there we go, we have attribution share-alike. So I'll change that to non-commercial. And I'll add some details about me, Brian, UTO, media, and let's do twitter.com/UTO Pro. All right, so I add in some information about me, I hit save, and then I might have to refresh my site here. There we go. I refresh it for the theme portion. There we go. Now we've moved over to the documentation theme. And what changed is all captured in this site.json file. So let me close site.json. Oh, geez. Come on. There we go. Site.json. And there we go. It wrote my name, email address, social link, and then added some additional details here. You can see we capture what version produced this. We also have that by that Creative Commons non-commercial license short tag, which then we can leverage in order to do that. So now me in a UI saying, hey, this resource is non-commercial, we take that setting, bring it with the content, and then as we're rendering the page, append that information. So this will tell a search engine that my content is non-commercial as far as its license. So if it wants to showcase that metadata, it now can. It also has little Twitter card shares, open graph metadata, all that fun stuff, as far as embedding this in social sites, so that it won't work because this is not a valid web address. But if I was to dump this into like a twitter.com and it goes to generate a preview, it would have that material there. So we end up reading and writing to this site.json file, so it keeps it all organized, but also so that this is effectively a static web page that can kind of run anywhere. So mention Jwt Token. So what is that? Okay, so that's a good question. A JSON web token is, let me see if I can find mine here. Local storage dot JWT. There we go. So JWT is, and please feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong here. So a JSON web token is effectively a token that represents a session login of the user in question. So somewhere in here, like think of this as almost like a public key. Somewhere in here, there is information that can be siphoned off, decrypted, and it would say, hey, this message came from, in this case, I'm logged in as an account called admin. So what happens is if I, let's see if I can force this to happen locally. If I go to here and I hit log out, and then let's see if we inspect console again. Local storage, which is just a base part of the browser, local storage.jwt is undefined. And so what we end up doing in HAXCMS is, if I refresh, it's going to start to load up the interface and be like, whoa, I don't have a JWT and I couldn't validate it. No, no go. Now, if we move the network tab over here, move this over to this side, and then I type admin and stuff, which is not my password, I get a 403 access denied, right? So I'm actually posting that information up to a backend. That backend is going to send me back a JWT if I log in successfully. So as this is local development, do the correct username password. And then when it hits login, I get back what's known as a JSON web token. So because that login was successful via the form, the backend validates and says, oh yeah, this username password matched by whatever metric, sends me back a JSON web token. It is then my responsibility to ship that JSON web token with every call that requires credentials in order to be unlocked. So for example, get user data is an API call. It has to contain a JSON web token, and that JSON web token must be validated for the user. So it's a way of securing. If I take this and I copy and paste it, it says invalid token. It's a really basic way, right? It's just going to validate that token, decrypt it, and go, hey, you're trying to execute an operation on behalf of an account called admin. Are you actually the admin? Oh, you are? Awesome. We're good still.
To illustrate that, you could take that web token, Brian, and go to jwt.io.
Okay. I'll do that.
And if you scroll down, you can paste it into that section. And on the right, it will show you the decoded JSON web token. So you can see that your user role or username is admin, the expiration dates for this token.
And these are Mike and I, it took us a while going back and forth and researching this specific aspect. So because the token can just be decrypted rather easily, right? There's no special hash involved. It's critical that there's an expiration date. And do you remember what IAT is?
Issued date or something?
Yeah, I can't remember what oh, this is when it was issued and this is when it needs to be refreshed.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
That's IAT's issued at time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a standard part of implementing JWT. And so issued at time is, hey, here's this thing. And then expiration is, it's only going to be valid until here. And so what you do on the front end is as you go to issue calls, you look for being within this window where I can't remember what the window is. There's a standard methodology we used for it, but let's say that you're within 100 milliseconds of the window, or it's actually, a minute. But if you're within a minute of the window of hitting expiration, there's a refresh token. And so you also get sent a refresh token that you can then send at another endpoint and say, hey, I'm about to expire, give me a new token. And so you kind of, if you think almost like, it's not blockchain, but if you think of blockchain where if you don't have the previous one, you're not gonna be able to get the next one. So they're able to leverage this, and I think that might actually be part of what the ID is that's in here, is I can ship this ID to the back end and it will give me back I'll use that in my refresh token so that prior to expiring, I can refresh this token automatically.
It's actually stored in most likely your cookie. So
oh yes,
along with
right,
your request is a refresh token cookie.
You're right. You're right. That is in the cookie, and I can't modify that. But there it is. So cookie is something set by the server that the client can see but can't modify in any way. It's just part of the way that the transport works. And so there's a refresh token, which my browser will use at a later point in time. And when we're about to expire, and there's some other cookies and get stuck in there. But when we're about to expire, the back end will leverage that token that it knows it's set, because the front end can't set that value. And then it will issue a new JSON web token to the front end. It took a while to set up the weird logic for that to happen, but effectively you can say, hey, I just ran this call and it should have worked, but it didn't. And that means that your JSON web token expired. And then the back end, the front end goes, oh, shoot, get a refresh. Let's see if we can refresh. And so it hits the refresh. The back end looks at this token and goes, no, you're still good. You're within 10 minutes or whatever, and then sends to the front end a new JSON web token, but also updates the refresh token so that if this occurs in the future, you won't notice. So what it looks like transaction-wise is if I waited long enough and I came back to this, I would go to save a page and it would say, save node, and it'd be like 403, get bounced back. The front end would be like, oh shoot, get a refresh token, come back again, and then be like, all right, now reissue that save. And so the user, you using the site, you don't even notice, but this happens on major applications, every 10 minutes or every day. I think every day is a general convention, unless you're doing like admin level stuff, and then it's, faster refresh token than that.
Right. And so the question is, yeah, that's a great question in the chat. How are we using these tokens to gatekeep content that's on static sites? And that is something that's super powerful. So Tom posted a link to a video that I did a while ago illustrating how you could leverage web components to broker these JWT authorizations for you to gatekeep content. So the basic idea is that as long as you have some sort of authentication service, you could issue a web component that would know how to go and request JWTs for you. So like, let's say that you have tons of static sites, you hand these web components to your developers. Let's say the web component is mycompany.auth or /auth. What they would do is by just putting that web component on the static sites, it would start trying to broker JWT requests to your authentication service. So in the video, I have like a web component that's trying to fetch users from one of my internal services and show it on a static site. And without an authentication web component, it does nothing. It comes back with invalid response request. But just by dropping that web component on there, the web component initially makes a request to the authentication service, grabs a JWT, stores it in local storage, just like Brian was showing. And then the web component that's responsible for requesting the list of users is now authenticated to do that because it has a JWT that just came back that was totally brokered by this web component. So it's really like whenever you break these down to web components being responsible for them, it's just like magic for developers, because they're just dropping a web component on the page, and all of a sudden they have Jwt tokens in their local storage. It's crazy.
Yeah, so this is actually what HAXCMS, and we've used this in other apps before, is it's called JWT-login, which is on NPM. And so HAXCMS sets itself up, looks for a JWT tag. If it doesn't find one in local storage, it tries to affix this to the interface and then goes, all right, hit the back end. Did it work? No? Okay, well, I'll just leave you logged out. So we're currently not doing it for gatekeeping content necessarily, although I think I just posted last night. Where is it? Yes. A boilerplate of page unlocking via system events, and that's effectively what would happen at some level. Now, the JWT gatekeeping would probably be more like, hey, you logged in via, in our case, Penn State. You got through Penn State's web access authentication system. You have access to these chapters of content or whatever. It'd be pretty simplistic. However, if we currently treat HAXCMS like it's as I said, this hybrid static, and seeing that at least in the way that I'm currently using it for gatekeeping. If I have an incognito window and I just go to this site, there's no editing interface. So the site and the content and its bootstrap process is self-aware of the fact that it's not logged in. So that other UI that brokered the login, set my JWT for this domain, now when I go to this page, it knows who I am and I'm logged in. Now, if I were to go back here and I log in and I go to the exact same content, because that JWT is sitting locally, now there's an authoring experience. And so that's what I mean by it's this hybrid static site. It's identical files, the front end is brokering all of that, but something else has to have basically come in and validated that it can talk to the back end. Now, the JWTs, they need validated every transaction. So, you're not just, hijacking and putting in like local storage.jwt equals stuff, right? Every one of these calls, when it goes to the back end, is going to get shipped back there, and it's going to have to be validated for it to save, which saving is just taking the content. And actually, I think the theme is busted on these. Need to update the theme. Oh no, Andrew might have said something about this. But so I'm making content. I have a grid. I'm going to say disable that responsive thing, make it 5 columns wide, duplicate the image. I need to update the UI there, but until I do that, I can move this out of the way. All right, we'll make this nice little 5 columns silly thing. All right, save. And then what we're actually saving every time as we do that is a static file that someone else can come along and see without ever seeing the page editing material, right? So if I go to test, 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 and then I would have to find this take a break from the web, which as Mike said earlier, that's kind of a problem. There we go. So it's requesting this page so I can view source. So HAX is just saving that body blob directly to that file. If a normal user without that JWT comes along, they just get the content. If they have that JWT, magically we kind of hydrate an authoring experience for them. So that's the general way that we leverage JWTs. That was an awesome question, by the way, Kartik. We've never actually gotten to go through and talk about what JWTs are before, and Mike and I know beat our heads against the wall for a solid 3 weeks getting our implementation methodology down for that.
Yeah, for sure. It can be definitely very powerful with static sites.
So does anyone have any other questions in this JWT, JSON Web Token security layer thing before we move on to anything else, because it's an interesting subject matter. Forever hold your peace then. So Another aspect of what we're building with HAXCMS, we just showed from an open publishing perspective, is that content is agnostic of the design that it's placed within. So this is probably something that when Mike talks about Rcoder and like having this decoupled thing that lives somewhere but needing to live on past where it's implemented, at first it's probably a little like, why would I do that? Like just make it work. And part of why we can't just make it work is we want that abstraction to be able to take this content and remix it and use it elsewhere and it not be tied to the rest of this design paradigm. Or in the case of Rcoder, the front end presentation of this material not being tied exclusively to some proprietary setup that Mike happened to invoke, you know, on a VM somewhere. We don't want to be in that business anymore. Or, you know, take proprietary and we'll say in Drupal. We don't want to write Drupal modules that are specific to processing our code, and then that directly influences your front end presentation. This same page that I just set up in that other site, I can take and edit with the exact same tools, duplicate, get a ton of these, save back again and again. I just have that writing to one file, which I could switch back to the other presentation methodology. One of the last things I wanted to show as far as what I did this week. Well, let's go to HAXCamp again because that has a bunch of media. I got media hooked up. So I had media searching working in Drupal and WordPress showed in past weeks. I got it working today with the local files in place. So what I think is unique about this one, other than like, hey, okay, so it updates and I can take me and I can drop me on that page and use that, and I can drop that HAX image in. The unique thing with this one is if I go to that test site and files, it's just reading off of this folder. And so if I take other images and we just copy and paste them over there, I'll get rid of that one. And then let's take this, and we'll take Office Spellschnickel Dwight Schrute. That sounds phenomenal already. Who knows what images I have in this download folder. But if I just add those files into test/files, now when I go back to my test site, which is, there it is, keep forgetting. So I go back to my test site and I want to add something to this home page, search local files. And now all those images that I had previously, they just show up. And media in general, actually, I was gonna say, yeah, HHL MP4 will show up, which I put in other videos. Well, that's actually a video. So then I'm embedding a video. Now, granted, you're gonna get the whole stinking MP4, right? There's no magic pseudo streaming going on here, although your browser will attempt to start playing this as it goes through. But any files that you put in your files directory, you're just gonna have access to, you know, dump into HAX, which I think is pretty cool. I can't do that with, you know, Drupal or WordPress, or even GravCMS for that, Matt. Well, GravCMS I think has some capabilities like that, but it doesn't require you to put them into, you know, some database system or use an import form. You just literally take the files and dump them in, and now I have them. Dropping the 93-mile-an-hour slapshot thing. So save, and then we've just got all of that stuff on the page. So that's kind of what we're building with HAX. I did mess around this week with getting it working in Canvas. I could click the right thing and page. I can take a file, and I uploaded this before. So what I did is I took a file from hax.psu.edu, which is my IST 402 course. And this is purely experiment, like who knows how we're gonna do this, but I viewed source, and by tweaking course settings on the server, I can more or less copy and paste this. So I basically took this material and copy and pasted it into an HTML file, and then uploaded the HTML file into Canvas, which then I end up getting something that looks like this. Whoops. And so then I can take this, paste it in, and this is leveraging web components off of our CDN, and it's actually remote loading my site.json file from this static page. Now, that last part, I don't entirely know the utility of. Other than if we were to, say, make a HAX11 site and publish it, and it had rather sophisticated content in a river of news type of format. What the source on that looks like is, where are you? Wow, they have some weird wrapper on this, don't they? View frame source. Ah, there we go. The only things that I had to tweak to get that to work is, it doesn't even have it shown there. Oh, it reloads after you make it load. So maybe I lied. Maybe it doesn't actually correctly do it. Huh, I'll have to mess with that more then. What it's supposed to do is actually present the content from that other source. So I guess the first page load bombs out and then it switches over to the correct URL. So I'll have to look at what's going on there. It's definitely quite experimental. And there we go, that one that doesn't load content on it. So let's see if there's an error in there. View frame source. There we go, okay. I don't know that this is a valid thing that you could do where you set a base to a remote URL. That might actually be why it's getting ticked off. However, it is loading up that initial outline successfully because in here I took site.json and pointed it to this remote site.json file. Now, as we are trying to build out an OER-based platform, I don't particularly care that my quote-unquote database for my course content is available via this JSON file. But so that was all I had today.
Since we're talking about open publishing, this thing called OER Schema got a 1.0 release.
Woo.
You want to talk about what that is, Mike? It is kind of your thing, and it is.
No, I was just cheering it because it took a year. I mean, I wasn't prepared to, but I can do that if you're interested.
Here's the elevator pitch.
Yeah, what changed to make it 1.0?
Well, I will just
pull up the change log.
Yeah, I did one of those. Totally did it. All right. Okay. So yeah, essentially, this is the schema. And when we first started building this, schema.org, which is what we extend in RDFA, source here, let's just go to schema.org. So they started introducing terminology related to courses. So the LRMI group on Dublin Core started making recommendations and working with the schema.org people. And so our idea of course conflicted with theirs. So we updated this, and there's a few other things. Am I going to remember what it is?
So what Mike is showing is a way for us to decorate our HTML with rich schema so that bots and tooling can understand exactly what assignments are and how that relates to a course, so that it can be derived from just looking at an HTML page.
Right, so it's taking a lot of that metadata that Brian was talking about before that helps with transferring certain information about a particular HTML resource. In our case, we're transferring information about OER course information, so pedagogical information. So down here you can see the changes that were done, but essentially it's just aligning it with other schema projects so that we didn't conflict or conflate with existing schema. So that was like what the 1.0 release was about. But I'm working right now to build an 11D project just for myself, A, to learn 11D and B, to practice implementing OER schema, because not really I'm like a pseudo developer. So I have to actually like get familiar with implementing the schema project itself. But we do have an example sort of HTML page here. So this is just some of the schema implemented. So if we just go down here, you can see that, you know, for instance, this particular p tag has a resource ID, which is,
we can't see the
oh, you can't,
inspector.
Right. Am I able to drop that in?
You might have to make it like attached to the window. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking for the button to do that. Dock to right.
There we go.
There we go. All right, cool. So yeah, you can see like resource is pointing to actually a Creative Commons license. And the way I believe metadata works with Creative Commons licensing is you actually have to have a unique one for each thing that you reference. So even though it might share like a BYSA license, the ID for that has got to be unique. At least that's how it was explained to me. So that's why it's got this like unique ID next to it. And then somewhere in here, there's a meta tag that actually, I'm not sure if it's in the footer or where those metadata pieces are, but yeah, anyway, so you can see other, you know, our prefix here pulling in a couple different schema vocabularies, and including schema.org and Creative Commons. And then we just sort of implement it here. So the idea is that in the future, this helps our OER course content become interoperable and standardized. So everyone using the same schema will be able to more easily, you know, use software tools to remix content and you know, search for content, especially as the vocabulary gets more sophisticated. And there's a lot out there in LRMI that help describe things for particular K through 12 standards. But we're not super interested in that kind of specificity. We're more interested in creating a very easy to implement and flexible standard, but have it still be a major step in the direction of interoperability of content for open educational resources. So that's kind of the gist of the project. And yeah, so it's kind of been slow to develop over the last year. So we finally had a meeting and got some work done on it last week. So that's kind of that project.
Would you say that since it's a it's, as you said, like it's a little difficult to put schema on everything, that's something that like a visual editor would help out with?
Yeah, and it's difficult to build an interface to let you understand schema in a context like that. It's like, I think something that people have been trying to figure out for a long time. I'm really partial to like node flow interfaces just because that's prevalent in other software I use, and I find that it helps create like a mental map. Or no, it kind of aligns with what you think of as a mental map of how information is connected. But, you know, someone like Ted Nelson has his Xanadu project, which uses a particular, they don't use HTML, they use these, they're kind of like little plain text files. I forget the file extension for them, but then they have a visualizer that visualizes like a, I don't know what you call it. It's almost like draft view in a Word doc where you just see a stream of text, but then there's these like lines that connect to derivatives of a particular piece of text or what that text is based on. So what it is deriving. I don't personally like that interface style, and it also is a project that's like 40 years old or something crazy like that.
So
Actually, I think
about
it's like
to hit 1.0, huh?
Project Xanadu. Yeah, if you guys are interested, it's pretty funny. Project Xanadu. So like he's also, you know, Ted Nelson, who came up with hypermedia essentially for the web. That's the Wikipedia page. I guess he's just not actually a good developer. He's just like a theorist or something, which is why he couldn't really build it. He's been kind of relying on other people to build it. But yeah, like this is not a good website.
That's by your rules, man. This looks really responsive. So,
Wired called it the longest running vaporware story in history.
Yeah, I mean it's finally a thing. It's a thing. Like it became, yeah. That's I don't know why it's so hard to actually get to the project examples. No. Whole story of the viewer and to download it. So that one little here link. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about. It's like this kind of rolling scroll of text that lets you like go back to sources and link to future sources. So it's like an interesting take on things, but it's very rigid, and you have to, like, if you want to monetize it, in order to actually read this paragraph, you like might have to pay a penny or two if it's got a particular license on it. So it's like introducing like notions of commerce, so people can get like paid for their thoughts. But you know, do we also have to pay the people who invented the English language? I don't philosophically believe or buy into that, but that's kind of what this project is. It's an interesting thought experiment.
Gotcha. Well, congratulations on the 1.0 release.
Thank you. I should get a cake or something.
you should. Well, and HAXCMS is, you know, pre-wired for that stuff. And as we keep getting it more and more into HAX 11D and other places, I mean, stuff will start filtering its way out. 1.0 means a lot to a lot of people. So
right, and I guess I didn't mention that we intend to build some web components so that we can make it easier to, while maybe not visualize the entire interconnectedness or the relationships of all the elements on a page, that by dragging in, like, let's say you've got you know, some sort of assignment and where students have to do things. There's a description, there's steps to actually complete the project, there's learning resources associated with it. So those could all be different web components that are pre-designed. So maybe, you know, something like HAX would allow you to just drag a fully pre-designed assignment, and then you would sort of configure the assignment. And, you know, whenever you save that page, it's writing something to that JSON file, deriving relationship information from the outline. So how things are related to each other in the outline could also relate, you know, assignments to a lesson and learning objectives to a lesson and so forth. So it's all kind of working towards that being incorporated into HAX. But
they all take standards. So thank you for your work.
Okay, you're welcome.
yeah, we need a standard to build on top of that.
Right.
Nikki had I think you missed maybe 2 weeks ago or so, and we had Sonia on to talk accessibility with the image element. We had an interesting conversation about kind of adding this notion of sidecar or related elements in HAX, where we currently have a thing called inline. We have another thing called grid plate, and we have another thing that's just like elements in general. So elements in general can go anywhere. Inline elements can only be applied internal to other elements, and grid plates they can have stuff dropped in them. That's kind of the 3 rules right now. Nikki was proposing almost this like associated element or associated item type of a thing. And the initial use case was like, hey, you have an image and you want to put, it is actually an IMG tag, but you want to put this really nice long descriptive thing that actually overlays the image, so you could click and see what all the, all the metadata associated with how the picture was taken was, or whatever, or a long text description of what's in the image. That wouldn't just be internal to a tag. That would actually be a thing that latches onto and enhances another tag. But it could be any tag that it's enhancing. I wonder if there's some implementation associated with OER schema where we do something similar, where we have these like enhancement elements. And so we don't make like a OER schema content that happens to be a paragraph, and we don't make a OER schema image. We actually just have an image, and then you can associate, a pedagogical standard to, or something. I don't know what that language is, but something where you're basically creating an additional layer of information on the page without necessarily influencing the web components that are there directly, because we don't want to get stuck in the like, I know we had worked on an OER-schema tag, and then it's like, oh yeah, just this word in a page is OER schema. Like it's going to be more the elements in the hierarchy.
Yeah, I think the granular, we didn't know how granular to get when we were first thinking about it. I think it's important to maybe make it simple first and work towards granularity if there's a need for it. I know that's often the opposite of how you want to maybe develop something, but the other thing to think about is the presentation, the visual presentation of it. So that's something that I have struggled with HAX, because there's a particular way that styles are implemented that are distributed. And so, the idea of separating visual presentation from, like whether you actually are going to render the license information in a particular consistent way, or whether you're going to let someone make any kind of visual presentation and then just associate particular things in the content. I'm not sure what the right answer is, because you could like someone who isn't a designer necessarily could go in and sort of put together any kind of mess of information and sort of just right click and add, associate OER schema to it. But there's another connotation here, which is like, do people really need to know what OER schema is? Should it not just be something that's invisible in the background? And would existing components really enable you to eliminate having to know what it is and how to create those relationships, versus something that's pre-designed? Like, let's say I'm an expert on OER schema. I know how to build a template for a lesson or build a template for an assignment. And maybe a skilled developer could go in and modify that if they want. But no one really ever has to right click and add OER schema, so to speak. So I think that's kind of the question right now, is where's the balance? And I'm leaning towards making it accessible to the average non-computer developer or non-web developer oriented faculty member, or aspiring faculty member, maybe someone who just wants to write some educational materials, no matter who they are. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we have to strike a balance. I mean, I do like I like the notion that our video player has OER schema in it. And so everywhere that video player is used, whether it's in educational context or not, it's going to have OER schema in it. So I think that helps with distribution. I think that helps with some level of getting the standard out there. And it is in a way that, makes sense. Like, hey, this happens to be a video and that's a media resource type of a thing. But at the other hand, yeah, I think it would be nice if someone could just write a page of content, not have any idea what OER schema is, and magically the content knows that it's a objective list. How best to achieve that, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my approach is going to be to have like, it's just something I'm experimenting with whatever site generator I end up using.
HAX11.
Yeah, 11D's has been kicking my butt mentally for the past couple days as I'm trying to switch from Jekyll. But, you know, I think it might be easier to start with something pre-designed and pretty rigid until there's a need to actually start making it more flexible, like until people want to use it in a context that isn't accounted for. That might be the way to go. At least I'm going to experiment with that first. And then we can kind of compare our approaches if they end up being different and see the benefits of them.
I mean, even if you made complex editing interface so that they could customize everything, it's still going to be confusing. So at that point, just edit the HTML if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, well, in my case, it'll be, you know, like go to Forestry and create like, you know, so Forestry gives you the ability to create templates. And so they would just click on the like create new button in Forestry, and then it would create a lesson based on a template, and they just fill out whatever I give them to fill out, and then they click save, and then it's got all the schema in there, but they didn't have to actually look at any source code. They're just looking at Forestry's kind of limited CMS-y kind of capabilities. So, I mean, HAXCMS could probably do a lot more, and HAX11D will probably be able to do a lot more, but until we get to that point with those tools, it's just kind of something I'm experimenting with for now.
I think two things contextually for you to bear in mind, because the web has moved since we started this process. So, I mean, OER Schema has been your idea for several years now. Like, this isn't just like yesterday. And at that, you know, for that matter, HAX and our web component stuff, we're now going on 3 years. When we started, there wasn't a good way in HAX to have high SEO associated with the material in the page. And there wasn't a way with HAXCMS to do it. And the search engines couldn't even read the web components. And now, from when we started with those contexts and being like, oh crap, to now, Bing and Google both read into the shadow roots, which means they will see that content that's there, whether or not it's presented via JavaScript. And HAX has support for on save, actually writing information in a progressive enhancement way, which is how earlier I went to a page that had like a SpongeBob meme on it. Well, it was actually a meme maker tag, but if you would go to the page without any JavaScript loaded, you actually still get the meme and the content. Now, meme maker is the only tag so far that's implementing that. I think, well, video player might as well, but it's another thing just for keeping in mind. I mean, that we do have the ability for search engines to hit this stuff, whether it's buried way deep down inside material, or you give an interface for people to use it, or it's a task list, you know, task-list tag, and people get their little instructional objectives and it happens to write it for them. So all of those will have the exact same experience from a search engine standpoint, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's cool.
Cool. So we are closing in on time. If nobody has anything else that they would like to discuss, then we can call this a 1-1. By that I mean 11. 11 for 11D. HAX11D, Potter. That's how you do HAX11D.
There you go.
Is with the two things and the HAX sticker.
That's
so
complicated. I need.
Thanks for tuning
props.
in. It's complicated props. I mean, it's why I have the whole basement. That's why I work from home now. So with that, thanks for tuning in, hanging with us. If you want to learn more about our projects, you can go to haxtheweb.org or haxtheweb.org. Wow, I actually said it the whole way through. It's phenomenal. Got this radio voice thing going. Or you can go to elmsln.org, or it's bit.ly/HAX Slack to get into our Slack channel if you want to get on the show. But with that, thanks everybody for joining us. And we are now into our second double-digit episode. So we will see you next week for our third double-digit episode for episode 12. Have a good week, everybody.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.